Welcome everyone. It's been a while. In a previous video of mine, I stated that Genshin Impact does not have a good story, nor is it a good story. And I want to clarify that. This video will primarily discuss games such as Arknights alongside Genshin Impact and why I feel like they differ. Now, I've stated numerous times that in my opinion Blue Archive excels in characterization, and that's the strong suit of the game. And in a previous comment, it made me discuss the problem with Arknights itself. And this is subsequently a problem that Genshin Impact has as well, so don't think it's just limited to this one game. Storytelling in video games is difficult because unlike other forms of media such as movies or even books, you don't necessarily know what the reader is looking for or what the player is looking for. When an individual opens up a book they expect them to read, they know walls of text are going to be prevalent here and they just want a good story. That's what they're here to focus on. With movies, someone might want action scenes, someone might want just something to turn off the brain and watch, but they may grow attached to characters. Video games are a bit difficult because you do have individuals who want to focus on stories, you do have individuals who just want to play the game, you have individuals who just want to make the strongest account they can. There are so many different diverse options that you can't necessarily guarantee whether or not a player will get attached to the story, whether or not they will care, whether or not they're going to want to read, and you have to find different ways to convey that information to them in a much more pleasing manner than you otherwise would. Now, games can take entirely different routes with this. You have Uncharted and Red Dead Redemption, which take a much more linear storytelling approach, and I think this works alongside games like The Last of Us simply because you know the route the player is going on, you know the way they progress, you know what they've seen, what they've heard, and how the characters have interacted previously in front of them. You get a general gauge of how long they may have known a character or what they're already experiencing. Open world games or non-linear ones really don't have the advantage because the player could have learned 82 different things before getting to this point in the story. The player could have learned or done so many different things that invalidate this one section of the game. And gacha games like Arknights, Genshin, and Blue Archive have a difficult approach because individuals might attach the amount they've spent to a certain character. Individuals might like a character's design or the combat experience or the lore. And so storytelling becomes a bit more difficult when you bring that into the equation. This is simply because you have no way of guaranteeing why or knowing why a player is attached to a character or if they care. I mentioned previously that I became interested in Blue Archive's story because of Izuna and a few other characters here and there, but mostly Izuna, because I care for that character. And from a developer standpoint, there's no real way of knowing if that's going to be a situation that actually happens. Will a random character released later on make you care? In Genshin Impact, I became much more involved when Zhongli dropped, and as a direct result of that, if we're talking about the game from Hoyo versus standpoint, is there really a way to say or know that this is going to pull players in? And that's what makes, in my opinion, storytelling so difficult in these games because you could get halfway through the game and then finally start to care about the story. Arknights, however, in my opinion, does an awful job at this. Like I previously mentioned, Arknights has a deep lore. Arknights is a game that is really deep and steeped in its style, in its lore and storytelling. You even have the background characteristics, you have different materials you use, all relating to one another, and this is standardized. But every character has relations to one another, every character seemingly has interactions with one another. You have this history that's already in the game, and that really does show they put a lot of thought and a lot of effort into creating this world. But the problem is, Arknights has a good story. It's awful at telling you it. See, the problem is, once you throw a player, or even if you give a player the action they want, the cutscenes, the music, whatever, and Arknights has pretty much all of that, the gameplay that's intriguing enough to keep them entertained, you have to keep that going. Genshin Impact is suffering to the same fate as Arknights as well, in that you have the moments that are really filled with these beautifully depicted cutscenes and these wonderfully designed characters. However, both Genshin and Arknights are subject to walls of text. This is not a good way of storytelling because you're just dumping a bunch of information onto the player themselves, and most likely no one's going to want to read all that, and even if they do, because it's so much information at once, it's very unlikely that they will understand or fully comprehend what they just read. This is not saying the player is dumb. This is merely saying that in that situation, the player doesn't really have context or a reason to care or put this information and pair it with something else. Sure, they might, but that's only going to be for as long as their interest is going, and Genshin and Arknights both don't like to just throw you one paragraph. They like to throw you 6, 7 of them, constant walls of text, some of them that repeat what a previous one said, and this is a very very fast and efficient way to lose player interest. Arknights has deep lore, it has a good story, but the question is, how many players are going to dig deep enough and try and summarize that enough to find out and figure out what happened, to figure out why this character does this, or who likes what. In Genshin Impact, you can have a solidly told story with these wonderfully depicted cutscenes, but an example is, if we're talking about someone like the Raiden Shogun, who had a very tumultuous release, the character was split in so many different ways that it's very difficult from a new player's point of view to understand what that character is even about. The more lore a game has, the more it has to go off of, but the difficulty is, if it relies too heavily on that lore and on that information that is not directly told to the player in a meaningful way, then the player themselves ends up being disconnected and confused. In Genshin Impact, it's very common to go watch a lore channel to simply explain and have them explain a character or a plot point that maybe you're confused on. When the game itself, when the game's story requires you to go to an outside source to figure out what happened and or why, then it's failed at storytelling. Don't get me wrong, it's perfectly fine to want to seek that out, to understand more yourself, but the question is, are you capable of fully comprehending and understanding what the game is attempting to tell you on your own? If the game dumps several paragraphs and you don't have a clue as to what you just read, then that's a problem. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that every game needs to have beautifully rendered cutscenes and amazingly designed graphics. I'm not saying that, because I know it's not true for many other games. But there are ways to tell stories, there are ways to inform us about characters that don't rely on walls of text. Arknights has access to the background information for each character. An example is Silver Ash. You have access to the background information of this character. But as you play over time, as you increase your rank with this character, as they get to know you and you get to know them, theoretically that should unlock more for you to understand and more for you to know. This does happen. You gain access to more information about this unit. However, the difficulty is when you go into that menu, in the same manner as Genshin, all you're left with is a wall of text that you can read. It's not like it's spoken to you, at least in a language you can understand. It's not like it's a cutscene or some images that are rendered out. It's not like it's even a comic or manga that you can read. It is quite literally paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. And this may be fine for some people. I quite like reading a lot, but the difficulty is I'm not invested enough, nor am I in that individual mindset where I want to read a bunch of paragraphs because I'm playing a game. I expect visual entertainment, and in that scenario, Arknights doesn't provide that to me. Arknights is a beautiful game, but it fails at the storytelling and it fails at the characterization, because I can look at this game and see wonderful graphics, I can see beautiful art styles. What I can't see is the story that's being told to me. What I can't understand is what the game is trying to convey about these characters, because to me, even though I have them, even though I want to learn more about them, all I see are units I can drop on the field and they do big damage, because there's nothing driving me to further learn about these units. And even if I want to, where would I go to the point where I'm not just bored out of my mind? It's not like there's a world I can explore. I'm not asking for an open world. It's not like my relationship rank gives me an interesting little story tidbit or something that I can actually do with this unit that gives me a bit more of an attachment to them. And it's not like every unit is viable everywhere. Sometimes you want to replace them out. So Arknights, it's a good game, it's a fun game, it's a game that requires you to think, but it's not a game with a well-told story. I know it's been a while, I know I haven't uploaded in quite a long time, so I apologize for that. I'll try to get more consistent. My name is Shanghai though. I forgot to say that in the beginning. If you enjoy it, leave a like down below, consider subscribing to the channel, hit the notification bell so you get notified when I post a future video, and I hope to see you next time. I've been playing Epic 7, expect a video on that soon.